Good evening, everyone. I'm Judy Margles, Director of the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education. I'm here with Natan Meir, Chair of the Harold Schnitzer Family Program in Judaic Studies at Portland State University. And we are honored to welcome you for a historic evening with Eva Schloss, stepsister of Anne Frank. 5 school groups, rabbis, teachers, school principals, and executive directors of agencies from across both the Jewish and general communities of Portland have joined us here this evening. How wonderful to see so many of you braving the weather. Thank you. And we really do thank you for being here.
Our 2 organizations have joined with Chabad in sponsoring tonight's talk because we all share a common goal of educating our communities about Judaism, Jewish life, and Jewish history, including the Jewish people's greatest catastrophe. Though our approaches are all different, we appreciate greatly opportunities like this one that bring us together in common cause. We are grateful to the Chabad Center for Jewish Life for spearheading this event and putting in a tremendous amount of work to make it a reality. Please welcome its Executive Director, Rabbi Moti Wilhelm.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Natan, for that wonderful welcome, for the important work you do in the community, for partnering together with Chabad. Thank you, Portland, for coming out tonight. Thank you. Chabad. It's a hard word to say. Let's try that together. Chabad. If it scratched the back of your throat, you did a good job. The mission of Chabad has been stated as to search each other out in love as we were once searched out and hunted down in hate. Thank you to all who make this historic evening possible, to our steering committee, Neil Ben-Arroya, Carrie Goldring, Jordan Winkler, to our dedicated and energetic, unstoppable event planner, Melissa Bloom of Event in Bloom, to our sponsors, the Ben-Arroya Jewish Learning Academy, the Harold and Arlene Schnitzer Care Foundation, all of those on the program, and to all those who support Chabad throughout the year. Our funds are locally raised, and without you, historic moments like these would not be possible. Portland is home to over 100 Holocaust survivors. They are tended to by the Jewish Family and Child Services Holocaust Survivor Services programs. Tonight, many of them are here in the room. To them, to you, I say thank you. Before you, we all stand in awe. Our mystics teach us that the light of the Jewish menorah is lit by those who are crushed, by those who are oppressed. In the words of this week's Torah portion, kasis la ma'or, crushed to become sources of light, to become luminaries. You are those luminaries. In a night which never seemed to end, you believed that dawn will come. With every reason to despair, you had the courage to hope. After being sent to death camps simply because Jewish blood runs through your veins, you continue to live, to love, and to raise Jewish families and Jewish communities. You are the lights of our menorah. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise from your seats and give a standing ovation in appreciation to the Holocaust survivors who are here tonight. Thank you. But friends, a thundering applause is not enough. Tonight, we gather here to listen to these stories and to commit ourselves. Kasis Lamaor, we will press ourselves, we will squeeze ourselves, we will push ourselves to our limits to become greater luminaries, to bring love where there's hate, to bring light where there's darkness, to bring hope where there is despair. Tonight we commit to those who, in the face of the greatest oppression and the greatest crime in humanity, maintained the spark of Judaism. Tonight we commit that in this country of great freedom and great abundance, that flame will not go out. The format of tonight's evening is Mrs. Eva Schloss, who at the young age of 8 was a Jewish girl, completely powerless, is going to sit down for a conversation with a Jewish woman, one of the most powerful in our community, a testament from where we came and where we are today. Please welcome Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum.
So if at this time I could ask Mrs. Eva Schloss to join me on the stage. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Eva, and she told me I could call her Eva, right?
Sure, yes.
And you can call me Ellen, not General. In 1938, Germany invaded Austria, causing many Jewish families to flee Austria to avoid persecution. Among the emigrants was 8-year-old Eva Geringer, who with her mother, brother, and father moved first to Belgium and then to Holland, where one of her neighbors was a German Jewish girl of the same age. The two girls became friends and playmates. They passed the time by skipping and playing hopscotch and marbles and drinking lemonade, all the things girls love to do. Ultimately, both girls and their families were deported to the Auschwitz concentration camp, and later they would become stepsisters. Eva survived her concentration camp experience and made her way to England, where she married Eva Schloss and raised 3 daughters. She worked as a studio photographer and she ran an antique shop. Her stepsister did not survive Auschwitz, but kept a diary that did. Her name was Anne Frank. Since 1985, Mrs. Eva Schloss has devoted herself to Holocaust education and global peace. She has recounted her wartime experiences in more than 1,000 speaking engagements, several of which were just this week. She has written 2 books and has had a play written about her life. In 1999, Eva signed the Anne Frank Peace Declaration, along with United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan and the niece of Raoul Wallenberg, a legendary figure who rescued thousands of Jews in Budapest. So without further ado, we're going to begin some questions.
That's correct,
and
yes.
Conversation, Eva. But let me begin by once again thanking you so much for being here this evening. You are truly a remarkable woman with so much zest and energy to travel around the world. So I speak on behalf of everyone here when I say it is an honor to have you with us this evening.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
So let's start, if you would. Please take us back to your early childhood before all the ensuing events. Back to a time when you were a young girl in Vienna, then your family moved to Belgium and then eventually settled in Amsterdam. Please take us through those early years and why your family moved, and share your experiences as a young child with us.
Well, I was born in Vienna, Austria, a beautiful country. Our family has lived there for generations. We felt very much at home in the country. Austria was actually a Catholic country, but after the First World War, many Jewish people from Poland and Hungary and different neighboring countries came to settle in Vienna because that was the center of culture. And it was really, we had a wonderful life, and that was really very, very important for me later, to have the courage and the will to carry on to live. Because I wanted to experience life. You know, I was 15 years when I got to Auschwitz, and I was definitely not ready to just give up and die. But I had an older brother, we had grandparents, aunts, uncles, and but life changed immediately as soon as the Nazis in April 1938 marched into Austria. All our friends even stood in the street with big swastika flags and Heil Hitler salute, and we just couldn't understand what has happened. My brother, he was 12 years old, he came home from school, and he looked terrible. His face was completely bruised up and blood was streaming everywhere. And when my parents in shock asked him, "What has happened, Heinz?" He said, "My own friends did that, and the teachers just looked and let it happen." So from one day to the next, people had become like wild animals. And in Germany, of course, anti-Semitism has been already. People lost their jobs and were deported already. But in Austria, it was still very peaceful, and suddenly it changed completely. We were actually very, very lucky to get out. By 1938, many, many countries didn't want any more Jewish immigration. President Roosevelt called actually in 1936 in Evian in France a conference where all the countries were represented, and the question was, how many Jewish people do you still want to take in? And the answer was pretty negative. And this is how really the Holocaust happened, because the Jewish people, Hitler wanted to get rid of the Jews in all his occupied countries, but nobody wanted us.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I unfortunately must remind us that this is what happens now again. There are 65 million refugees now roaming the world who are looking for a new home. And again, the world isn't ready to accept those people.
So I'm going to take you back to when you were a girl, and then we'll come back to your very important last comments. When you were a girl living in Amsterdam around the age of 11, I understand you knew Anna Frank and were friends with her long before either of you knew what the future was going to bring. Can you share with our audience a little bit about that friendship with Anna Frank?
Well, we moved to Amsterdam in February 1940, already during the war, and we were not allowed to bring anything with us. So my father hired a furnished apartment on the Merwede Plan. If ever you go to Amsterdam, have a look there, because it's still there, and there's even a statue of Anna there. And that was modern apartments which the Dutch had built, and there was no gardens or yards, like you say here in America, where people to play. And so all the children came out on this big open square. And so after school, and a girl came to me one day and said, "You're new here, where do you come from?" I said, "From Austria." She said, "Oh, I come from Germany as well. My name is Anna Frank." And of course, she was not famous at the time. She became just one of my friends. And, you know, I had already experienced anti-Semitism. She came to Holland when she was 4 years old. Her father, Otto Frank, he very often later became my stepfather, told me when he saw the Nazis walking through the street with their songs, anti-Semitic songs, he said, this is not a country where I want to bring up a family. So at that time in 1933, it was still able to get out, and he settled in Amsterdam like other refugees as well. And so we became friends, but I had become shy and withdrawn, and as well I was a very sporty child. Austria having many mountains. We went on weekend, we went mountain climbing with my father, and I really enjoyed that. And my brother, he was more shy about things, he was very artistic, so I was really the boy of the family. And when I told Anne I had an older brother, because Anne was with 11 already very interested in boys. When I told her I had an older brother, she said, when can I come and visit your apartment?
Now we know how you became friends with Anna.
Yeah. But he wasn't interested in a little girl the age of his sister, you know. And he was a wonderful musician. And it looked as if life was going to be good again. But unfortunately it wasn't, because like you mentioned already, the Germans marched into Holland as well. That was in May 1940. In the night we heard aeroplanes and guns, and we put on the radio and it said, terrible news, the Nazis, the Germans are trying to invade our country. It was a very short war, just 5 days. That was in that war the first time that a big city, Rotterdam, second biggest city, a big harbor, had been bombed, and 10,000 casualties. And the Germans warned, if they don't give up, they are going to bomb all their cities. The Dutch royal family fled, first to England and later to Canada. That wasn't very helpful for the population. But you know, that was a time you had to make quick decisions. And that's what the Dutch royal family decided. And later they helped from abroad. And then Hitler went into Belgium, and the Belgian king cooperated with the Germans. He thought that is the best way. But after the war, he had to resign because the population said he betrayed the people. You know, decisions had to be made, some were good, some were bad. It's quite interesting, the only country where Jewish people were saved was Denmark. The Danish king, when we had to wear the yellow star, he wore the yellow star himself, and when he heard Jewish people were going to be deported, he went round on a horse and told all the people who had boats to get ready in the night. He said, we are going to take our Jewish population to Sweden, which was possible. And so all the Jews were saved there. But that was really the only country who saved Jews.
When the full Nazi invasion came, of course, the Frank family and many other Jewish families went into hiding. Can you tell us a little about what you recall of the moment your family went into hiding, being hidden, and how long you stayed there? And anything else about your family during those years?
Well, yeah, for 2 years we lived relatively still normal life. We had all kind of restrictions, like we were not allowed on public transport, we had to hand in our radio, we had to wear a yellow star, but it was a nuisance, but it was not life-threatening yet. But in 1942, 10,000 of our young people, including my brother, who was 16, and Anne's older sister, Margot, got with lots of others, got a letter to deport within a week to a certain place, to be deported to Germany to work in German factories. And luckily, my father and Anne's father, Otto, and many, many others were suspicious of that. First, they killed the Jews, and suddenly they invite them back to come and work in Germany. So my father called us together one evening, and he said to Heinz, you are not going, we are not sending you, we are going into hiding. But he found people from the resistance, and that is very important. There were many, many people, Dutch people, French people, Belgian people, Norwegian people, all occupied countries who didn't like to be occupied by the Nazis, and they formed a movement called the Resistance. So they shot particularly bad Nazis, they blew up trains, they printed ration cards, all kinds of things to make life more difficult for the occupation. But as well, they offered their homes to Jewish people to keep them safe. So my father said, I've made contact with people from the resistance, but nobody wanted to take in a family of 4, so we have to split up there. So he said, I will go with mother and Heinz will go with him. And I was 13 years old, I started to cry, I was very attached to my brother and my father, didn't want to be separated, we had been separated before. And my father explained, he said, if we are in 2 different places, the chance that 2 of us will survive is bigger. So he mentioned survive. And that was, I think, the first time I realized it could be a matter of life and death. And that was actually quite scary.
You've talked about your brother. You obviously had great love for your brother. You also told me he was a wonderful artist. Can you talk about his art?
Well, I come a little bit later to that. Well, I just start now about hiding. So we split up, we went into hiding. I went with my mother and Heinz went with my father. And we were staying with Dutch people, but the Germans knew that not everybody had come to their call-up notice, and they really wanted to kill every young Jewish person. So they made house searches. So in the night, there was a knock on the door, and the people, everybody had to open, the Dutch as well, had to open the door, let those Nazis come in, search their homes, and they were looking for people in hiding. It was always at night. And for instance, we heard a story in one apartment, Jewish people were hiding as well, and they went quickly to their secret hiding place, because in every hiding place where we were, the people from the resistance built kind of a false partition, sometimes even under the floorboard, sometimes in a cupboard where they made a wall, and so quickly we went in there. But in this particular house where we heard, the people had gone as well to hide, but they felt the beds, which were still warm. So they demolished the whole apartment till they found the people. And those Dutch people, of course, were taken away as well. So, you know, people became scared and said very often, you know, you can't stay with us any longer. We can't keep up with this every night. And so we moved around perhaps 7 times in the 2 years we were in hiding. And the terrible thing happened. My father and brother were blackmailed for more money after 2 years in May 1944. And he phoned my mother, because they were in the country and we were in Amsterdam, to get in touch with the resistance again and try to find a new hiding place. But by 1944, it was already very difficult to find safe places. And so it took my mother 3 weeks to find through the resistance. And it was a Dutch nurse who came forward knowing a safe home. But it turned out she was a double agent. She really worked for the Nazis. And we just had moved as well to a place, and she took my father and brother to this safe house, and we visited on a Sunday. And on Tuesday was my 15th birthday, and in the morning there was a knock on the door, and the people opened up, and the Nazis stormed in and took us away. They knew exactly who they wanted. And they took us to the Gestapo headquarters. They put me in a little room. There was a chair and a big picture of Hitler, and just took 2 Nazis with guns pointing at me, and they started to throw questions at me. Who helped you? Where did you get your rations car? Where did your father and brother hide? And question. And I was in shock. I just lost my voice. Eventually they told me they would kill my brother if I don't talk. Then I realized my brother had been caught as well. I had no idea what has happened. Eventually they let me go. They threw me in a room, and there I found my father, my brother. And they told me it was this nurse who was really an agent of the Nazis. Then we were taken to a local prison, and the next day to a holding camp in Holland, because you were not sent singly, you were sent on big transport to the east. And so we were in Westerbork, And the next week, we were already put on a list to be deported eastwards. In cattle trucks, you might have seen this on pictures. Well, like you've seen in this film, there were actually goods trains. So there was just a little slit of air. 80 people were pushed in, the iron doors were closed. We had 2 buckets, one for clean water, one for toilets. And once a day, as the doors were open and bread was thrown in like you would feed wild animals. But coming back to your question about my brother, in the cattle truck conversation I had with him, he told me he was really a musician, but of course in hiding you had to be completely quiet, and he couldn't make any music, so he started to paint. And he created some amazing artwork. He told me, you'll be amazed when you see what I've done. And before they escaped from that house where they were blackmailed, he hid them under the floorboards with a notice on it that belongs to Heinz and Erich Geiringer, and after the war, he's coming to pick it up again. And this was actually the last conversation I had with him. And my father, he was a wonderful, strong family man with tears in his eyes. He apologized to us that he doesn't know now what will happen to us, but he's sure he won't be able to protect us anymore. And that must be a very, very degrading thing for a father, not knowing that he can help his children anymore.
Reading your book, your father seemed like an incredible man. And there was a moment when your father apologized to you that he felt bad that he was no longer able to protect you, and he gave you a hat and a coat. Can you share with us what it was like when you first stepped off the train and what happened from there, and maybe a bit about life in Auschwitz?
Well, yeah, after a terrible, long, terrible journey, you know, there were as well work camps, but we didn't really know where. They never spoke to us, you know. We never knew what was going on. So after this terrible journey, about 3-4 days, the train stopped, and we heard dog barkings and a lot of shouting, and the doors were slid open, and we realized there was a platform, and we realized we were in Auschwitz. And we knew about Auschwitz because the British told, you know, you were not allowed in Holland listen to foreign broadcast, only to German and Dutch. And the British did broadcast about what happened in the war, but as well warnings about the 300 death camps and concentration camps in Germany and Poland where Jewish people were systematically being gassed. And Auschwitz was always mentioned as the biggest. So at that time, we really thought that would be the end of our lives. So eventually we had to jump down, and the next command, if ever you've been to this horrible place, you will realize how huge it was. It was miles and miles and miles and miles, and there were different camps. Auschwitz itself was a men's camp, and the women's camp was called Birkenau. Those towers, which you might know, it's actually on my book as well. That was Birkenau, and that where the train at the time stopped, and with the railway lines. And the first command was men and women to different sides. So the men marched to Auschwitz, to their part of the camp. And I remember this was something that made a big impression on me. My father was actually not a religious man, but he took me by the hand and he apologized to me that he can't do anything, but God will protect you. So, and then the men marched off, and, you know, that was it. And then we stood in rows of 5. You might have heard the name Dr. Mengele. He was a proper medical man, but he wasn't there to help people, but he was there to decide who was going to die and who was going to live. And the first selection was taking place at arrival. And we lost about half-hour Dutch transport, meaning all the children, all babies, all older people were taken to the wrong side. You mentioned the head and coat. I had just a summer dress, and my mother had this head and coat, and she gave it to me. And I didn't want to wear it. It was a very, very hot May day. But the hat had a big rim. And so when Mengele, just a fraction of a second, looked at you to decide death or life, he didn't realize how young I was. And so I passed through. And that, I must say, was the first miracle that happened to us.
Was there ever a moment when you just felt total despair and you just wanted to give up?
Well, I was a long time together with my mother, and that, of course, helped us a lot, both of us. You know, my mother gave me very often some of her bread ration, which was very, very little. We had really hardly any food. So a lot of people were starving. A lot of people got illnesses which can be cured in normal circumstances. But of course, if you not get treatment, you died. It happened, we had bunks where we slept. It happened very often that in the morning the person who slept next to you didn't wake up. And one of the worst things happened to me was once we were full of lice as well, and washing was something just never happened. So once a week we were deloused. We had a shower. Sometimes it could be a guessing. So we were very reluctant to go, but anyway, we had to go. And so one day, I think it could have been October, we came out of the shower still naked, and Mengele stood there with some of his SS guys, and he started the selection. And I passed, and my mother followed me, and she had become very, very thin. With 40 other women from our transport, they marched out naked, and they were going to be gassed. And for 3 months, that's what I thought. I thought I'd lost my mother. And that was for me a really, really hard time. It became winter. Sometimes I lost my shoes when you had to run in the snow. I had very bad frostbite on my toes. It became infected. Started to have gangrene, and I could hardly walk anymore. And I didn't give up, but I was on the point. I thought, well, I can't, how long can I still carry on? And I was working, and somebody called me out, and I thought, well, that's it now. And I went out very, very reluctant, and my father stood there. And that is something till this day, and I will never know how he was able to find me, how he was able to get permission. He came with his SS boss. He said he worked in a timber factory because he was a very, very clever man. He must have told how able he is to run a business or whatever. I don't really know. And the first question was, of course, he asked me, where is Mutti? And I told him she had been killed. And my father crumbled in front of my eyes. You know, that was terrible. And he came 3 times to see me, and then I never ever saw him again. And in the meantime, I carried on because my father came and he told my hands were still okay. And one day, you know, the Germans, we didn't know, but the Germans realized the Russians were approaching. And they were very much afraid of the Russians. So they started to evacuate the camp. Every day, thousands and thousands of people marched away into Germany and Austria. And there were very, very few people left anymore. And one day, my mother and me woke up, and was very deserted. The Germans had fled in the night. I have left out perhaps a few things, but but you know, there's so much to tell.
I'll try to catch up here. There were a few moments, in addition to the ones I think that you've described, where your mother, you and your mother were almost killed. Can you take us through any of those other miraculous moments, or have we hit the highlights?
Well, as you know, my mother married Otto Frank, so she was saved.
She survived.
She
right.
survived.
And how did
which
you
was-
discover that she had survived?
When the Germans left, most of them, the camp was not anymore so under guards, and people from the Dutch transport came to, there was many different camps, little parts, A, B, C, D camp, all separated by electrified barbed wire, which before was all gated, you couldn't move around. But after lots of the guards left, people moved around, and people told me they'd seen my mother. And she was there, she was still alive. But it's a long story. And in my book, actually, my mother was still alive. She was 93 years old, but she told actually what has happened. And she was 40 years old when she was selected to be killed, and she lived till 93. So, quite amazing. And and we were liberated together. And the Russians came. And I decided I would go to Auschwitz camp to try to find my father and brother. And I went there, it was about 3 miles, and I found 2 people who I'd known in Amsterdam. And I went to one of them, and he looked very ashen, and I barely recognized him, but I knew that I knew him. And I said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Otto Frank, Anne's father. And you are Eva Geiringer, Anne's little friend?" I said, yes. The first question, "Have you seen my girls or my wife?" And of course I hadn't seen them. I didn't know that they were in hiding as well. We were arrested in May, they were arrested in August, and there was the last transport from Holland to Auschwitz in September. And Mrs. Frank died actually in January, so just before the Russians came, and the girls were taken out, like my father and brother as well, and marched into different camps. But of course at that time we didn't know anything about that. And then the Russians looked after us, and that is what we do in England and in many European countries. I don't know if you do that here as well. Celebrate Holocaust Memorial Day, the liberation of Auschwitz, 27th of January. This is when I and my mother was there, and we were liberated, and Otto Frank in his part of the camp.
It must have been devastating to learn that your father and brother had not survived. How and when did you learn of their fate, and when did Otto Frank find out that his daughter and wife had not survived?
Well, as I say, we were liberated in January, but the war wasn't finished, so we had to go eastward to be safe. So the Russian transported us eastward. We traveled for 4 months with the Russian till we got to Odessa. And there they housed us in an old building, and we waited for the end of the war. And when that came in May, of course, then was great jubilation. And then actually we only realized that we had really made it. And then we still had to make a long journey through the Mediterranean, through Marseille, and then really up through the whole of France, back into Holland. And there we waited for news of our families. And we got a letter from the Red Cross, I think in July, August, very cool, just matter of fact. We have to tell you that your husband and your son, Erich and Hans Geiringer, died in Mauthausen, the terrible Austrian death camp, several days before the American army came to liberate that camp. That was for me the last straw. I had survived because I hoped we'll get back to a normal life again eventually, we'll be a family again. But when I realized that will never ever happen, I became very depressed. That sounds a big contradiction. I was more depressed the last few years after, from 16 to 20, than I was depressed in Auschwitz. Because in Auschwitz, I had to keep all my strength and all my will together to achieve something, to survive. But afterwards I thought, what's the point? We'll never be a family. That was really, really very hard. And Otto Frank too, he heard that his whole family had died, his 2 girls. And again, he was 57 years old at the time, and he looked ashen when he left, and my mother said, how can this man, what has he got to live for? And a few days later he came again, and he had a little parcel in his hand with a string, and he opened it very carefully, and he said, must show you something. And you can guess what it was Anne's diary. And Miep Gies, who was one of the helpers, after the family was arrested, she found it and kept it. That was in August. She thought the war will be finished and Anne will return very soon. Didn't read it, kept it in her desk. And when Otto came, she even then didn't she give it. Only Tini told her a few months later that Anne wouldn't return, did she give it to him. And he was so surprised about what she wrote. He read us a few lines, but he always burst into tears. It took him 3 weeks to read it. And he always said, he was very close to her, but he said, I didn't really know my own child. He was amazed at the wisdom she displayed already writing when she was 14 years old. And this is the value actually of her diary. How with that age she already had such a wisdom. She wrote about women's rights, which we are talking now about it, which has become a very important subject at the moment just now. And as well about, she says, why do we have to wait a day till we can do a good deed? And she said as well about racism and about religion. You know, she really was very wise. All the problems we are struggling now to solve, she is mentioning in. And that is actually quite amazing.
Did you know, or did Otto know that she was keeping a diary at all? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually he kept the diary in his briefcase. And when the Nazis came to arrest the people, the Nazi had Otto's briefcase, and he threw the diary out, and he took things in the briefcase which they wanted to take away, like there were silver frames and candlesticks he put in this briefcase, but the diary they threw on the floor. And as well, it was not just the diary, it was many, many loose pages, because she wrote quite a lot. The diary is actually quite little. And he came to us, and he helped me a lot through my dark period. He, who had lost everything, had no hatred. And that was really an amazing fact, you know. And I argued with him, but said, how can't you hate those Germans who did all that? And he was actually a proud German. He said, you know, I've lived there for generations. My family is German. I love their music, their literature, their whole way of life. And, you know, and he explained, you know, if you look through history, every country, especially the Western country, unfortunately, have done terrible crimes on our planet. The English in South Africa and in India, the French in Indochina, which is now Syria, the Dutch as well in the colonies. They all have done terrible things. And, but it is just a period, and it doesn't mean to say that everybody is bad. And he explained to me, and this is what is one of my messages, the Germans were afraid, they were bystanders. They should have had the courage to speak up when they see injustices being done. And this is what is one of my messages. We too, we have to speak up, have to let our governments know what we want. If we see injustice being done, if we see racism and religious discrimination, we have to speak up.
it would almost seem like we could stop there, but we can't, because we have some other really important things we'd like to talk to you about. And I can't, let me just go back to Anne her diary for 1 minute, because you were friends when she was 11. Did you notice then that she had this exceptional gift for writing?
Well, she, not for writing perhaps, but for storytelling. She was already drawing attention to herself, and she was a big chatterbox. In class, she was called Mrs. Quack Quack, because she never could stop talking. She had to stay behind very often, and she had to write 100 lines that she's not going to talk so much in talk. But
Is she a troublemaker?
It wasn't just gossip, you know. She had a lot of ideas in her head. And very often, you know, the apartments there, they had steps going up from the outside. She sat on top of the steps and told story to all the children around her. So she had definitely a gift for that already.
Wonderful.
And you know, after Otto got the diary, you asked about my brother, I told my mother, well, you know, we have to go and get those paintings of Heinz. And we did, and we found 30 amazing artworks, which, you know, is this what I've got from my brother. And a few years ago, I donated them to the Resistance Museum in Amsterdam. And they are in display. And so, you know, just a tiny little story. It might be, I hope you're not running over time.
Oh, you go right ahead. No one's leaving yet,
know,
right?
Anne said in her diary, one of the things, she would like to become immortal. Well, and she has, because wherever I go, anywhere in the world, people know who she is. Not everybody has read the diary, but they know, because she's a symbol of the 1.5 million children, Jewish children, who've been murdered by the Nazis. And my brother, too, being so artistic, he was very much afraid of dying. And when he was 12, he said to me one night, what will happen when we die? I'm afraid. And I said, well, I don't know, but let's ask our Father, who has all the answers. And we went to him in the morning, and Heinz said, Papi, what will happen when I die? And my father said, well, of course, your body will integrate, but you will live on in your children. And then this 12-year-old boy said, but what if I die before I have any children? And my father thought a moment, and he said, well, we are just a link who goes from generation to generation, and whatever you have done, even if it's a short life, you will be remembered. And so he had to accept that. And so now I wrote another book called The Promise, more for a younger audience. And this is about my brother's life. And as I say, it's a painting in South Africa. When I told that story, they decided they would make an exhibition of his life, so he's not forgotten. And when I was once in Russia, I met some people from Yad Vashem. You know, that's a Holocaust museum in Jerusalem. And they're still going around Poland and Russia to find people from villages where Jewish people had lived, to find their names. Because we want to really at least find the 6 million names of the people, not that they have been not lived for nothing, but at least that their name is known.
And we read those names here in Portland every year on the square, and it's a very special time. How did Otto Frank and your mother decide to publish Anne's diary, if we could just come back to that for a moment?
Well, Otto wanted to publish it, and on the other hand, you know, Anna had a bad relationship with her mother, where she wrote about, and his wife had died, so Otto was a bit reluctant to publish all this. And so, but he showed it to everybody. He was very, very proud, and eventually he decided he should publish it. But it was not really a success, because after the war, you can't imagine, everybody in Europe had suffered. Starvation, bombing, lost family, and so people didn't really want to hear about it. And but the diary was not really what happened in the camps. Those books only came out many, many, many years later, when people really wanted to learn about what had happened. But it was actually only become a bestseller when it was published in America in 1952. And the diary, as I say, it's not really a book about the camp, what has happened. So people were able to read as far as that, but didn't want to know much more.
Mm-hmm. Well, today there's a museum named after her, and the house in which her family hid has been preserved. Are you amazed the extent to which her work has become such a phenomenon?
Well, it's they say next to the Bible, it is the most read book in the world, which is really amazing. And she was really 14, no, was not even 15 years old when she wrote that. It's really quite amazing, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Now, I tried to get you to answer this question for me earlier when we met, but you wouldn't. So I'm going to ask it to you now in front of all these people, because I really want to know the answer. You've only begun telling your family's story in the last 20 years. Why is that? Why did you remain silent for so many years?
Well, I didn't want to burden my children with, with that their mother has suffered so much. It's really a big thing. And I have actually spoken in audiences here in America as well, where children of Holocaust survivors said, my mother, my father never told me anything. We did hear, of course, something, but that you tell your child what you have gone through is very, very difficult. So we didn't, my mother and Otto was 27 years they were married. It was a wonderful marriage. And after Otto died, my mother said, we never ever spoke about the camp. I don't know how Otto managed to survive. It was something you just didn't speak about.
Yes. How has it made you feel to be able to feel that you now can speak about it and wish to speak about it?
Well, I started to speak about, I was actually put on the spot through an Anne Frank exhibition, but I realized that when I came back from Auschwitz, I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to tell people what had happened. But as I said, people were not ready. And so we had to suppress it. And then was the motto, never again Auschwitz, we have learned our lesson. But when I realized we really hadn't, we had since then, we had terrible wars, the Korean War, the Vietnamese War, Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, and now Syria, and it goes on and on. And I realized we have to speak about it. We have to tell people how terrible wars are, how people come back from wars, changed people. I spoke to many veterans from the Vietnamese War who said they have nightmares, they can't forget, they are good people, but they can't forget the terrible things they committed, And it changes people, and it's a terrible thing for having soldiers doing those terrible crimes. And this is one question when I'm asked if I have forgiven. And I've realized I've not forgiven the Nazis who decided about sitting at the conference table and decided they were going to kill the people, Jewish people, all the Jewish people by gassing them. Those were evil people. But the soldiers who fought as guards in the camps, those were people who were just kind of weak people, and they started to do it. And like I say, once you kill the first person, you feel bad. The second you kill, bad. The third, you just don't notice anymore. It changes people. And so I've forgiven the German people as a whole, but not the real Nazis, the leaders.
Have you been back to Auschwitz?
I had no intention to go back, but I have actually been 3 times back, always with a film crew to do a documentary. The first was with a Dutch one, the second with a German one, and the third one, you'll be surprised, was with a Japanese one. Because the Japanese had their own concentration camps, their own terrible things, but they have not accepted it, they have not learned about it. And so this film crew said, through showing what happened in the German camps, they want to learn their own history.
You told what Otto Frank said about Germany. How do you feel about modern-day Germany?
Well, I think, again, you know, I have great admiration for Angela Merkel. She's the only one of all the countries in the world who has taken in 1 million refugees. And I think that is partly of a guilt feeling. They want to show that they are decent people now. But of course, she has had some problem with it. And of course, I know it is not so easy to just take in people, and especially because, you know, that between the hundreds, thousands, there might be a bad one, there might be a terrorist. And that is, of course, a risk we have to take. But we have to find a way of how to register people to find out who they really are.
Are you concerned by the growing number of Holocaust deniers and the rise in anti-Semitism in Europe and here in the United States?
I don't think so. I'm not really concerned about that because, you know, there is so much proof. Those are just Nazis who just want to make problems. But, you know, the Germans themselves, all the photos, all the pictures, you know, from the camps, taken by the Germans themselves, after all the camps are there. And the worst, where are the 6 million people? We have all their names, or most of them, you know, they were all killed. So that is not a possibility that it's not true, that it hasn't happened.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. So what would be
perhaps
go ahead.
I just tell,
yes,
you know, we are a little bit worried, the Holocaust survivors, and I think there are a few here with us, that who is going to take over the story when we are not around anymore. But I've just made now, a couple of years ago, a hologram. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Tell us about it.
That it's very technical, but I was sitting in there was a little film made about it. It's called 116 Camera. You can find it on the internet. I was sitting for a week in a huge globe with 116 cameras and many more lights, and I was asked over 1,000 questions. And well, I'm sitting there, and now you can see me sitting in New York in the Jewish Museum, and you can ask me questions. But I'm here, but I'm still sitting there.
That is very cool.
And so, you know, it is working already, and they've done 12 people at the moment, and they're going to take more survivors to do this hologram. And for the future, people will go and can ask those people questions who will be asked, all kind of questions about how it was life in the camps. Quite amazing.
We know that Anna Frank was immortal, and we know you will be immortal as well through the hologram.
So that I've become sort of immortal.
That's right. So we have a little bit of a surprise guest tonight, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for her to ask 2 questions. So I'm going to first introduce her, and then I will call up Sophie Bustetter from Portland State University. Sophie is a freshman at PSU. 3 years ago, Sophie played Eva in the play, speaking of being immortal, written about her life called And Then They Came For Me, Remembering the World of Anne Frank. And in an attempt to do justice to Eva's story, Sophie did lots of research, she read books, she watched films. Eva's story had a big impact on her and ultimately inspired Sophie to work to actively fight injustice throughout her life. So thank you for inspiring Sophie, and please join me tonight in welcoming Sophie Bustetter.
Hello.
Sophie, I'm going to hand you the microphone.
Perfect. So you can ask some questions. Thank you. Hi there. Thank you. Okay, so I have 2 questions for you. My first question is, how were your interactions with people in your 5 months travel back to Amsterdam after the liberation? And did you mostly encounter hospitality or hostility?
Well, as I say, we traveled back through many occupied countries by the Germans, through Russia, through Poland, through Romania, and we saw unbelievable destruction there. And those people were actually very kind to us. They tried to come to the train and giving us little things and so on. And and even I couldn't understand, of course, but the Polish people, the Russian people, they wanted to know, they had photos of their relatives if we had seen them, because so many people have lost family. And so they were very pleased that they were survivors, So, but when we came to Holland, and that was very interesting actually, we didn't know, all the other European countries were already liberated during the war of 1944. But Holland was occupied till the very end, and the Germans took everything the Dutch produced to feed their own people. And in Holland, when we came back, that was called the hunger winter. And imagine that tens of thousands of people had died in their own apartments because there was no food. Dead bodies were lying there from starvation. There was no cat and dog anymore. They all had been eaten. The people ate tulip bulbs. And then, of course, when we returned and wanted help, food and clothes, there was nothing.
Wow.
And it did happen, I haven't experienced it, but it did happen. The Jewish people came back to Poland, to their villages, and Christian people had, of course, moved in and taken over their houses, and then they were murdered when they wanted back to have their houses. But those were exceptions, but it did happen.
Wow. Thank you. My second question is, how does it feel to have young girls playing you all over the world? And what would you hope that they learn or discover from your story? And then along with that, because there's always an audience, what would you hope that the audience takes away from it?
Well, what those girls feel you can explain, because it's obvious that it made an impact on you and that you really want to help to change the world. And this is really the purpose of that play, to teach young people what has happened and to change the attitude. And yes, the first girl who played me was actually an Oriental girl, and in that cast, and my father was a black man. And I must say, at first I was taken aback a bit, but the acting was so good that in the end you didn't even notice it. And this is really what they wanted to show, that it's called blind casting, to show that it can happen to everybody, not just to Jewish people, the prejudice. And when I was in South Africa speaking in a black school, one girl came to me and she said, "Why were you persecuted? You are white." And I said, well, it doesn't happen just to black people. And this is, of course, true. Anybody can be persecuted. And unfortunately, it is like this now. In Egypt, Christians are persecuted. Jewish people actually are now, I think, the least persecuted in the world. The Muslims fight between themselves, different factions. And I went to school in Holland. We had the history, Dutch history, and we learned, and this is something is still incomprehensible, we had the 80-year war, Protestants against Catholics. We had 80-year fighting and killing each other. So it can happen to everybody, and that is why we should not hate anybody. We are all human beings. My husband always said, there's just one human race.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Sophie. I was deeply moved by your father's words that we are only the links in between the generations. How beautiful, how powerful. Friends, we are those links. and your generation, which was pressed, oppressed, and you continue to shine. You're a message to us that we who live here in the freedom of Portland, whose greatest worry is how to get home on a snow day, we have to press ourselves, kasis lamaor, we need to press ourselves to become luminaries. And tonight, as you walked in, you were given a quarter, and that's a challenge for you. How can you make the world a better place? What can you do to further the values, the morals, the message that we spoke about here tonight? And you have 1 quarter to get started. Give that to tzedakah tonight. We would have fulfilled the 3 pillars on which the world stands: sharing words of Torah, doing acts of kindness and tzedakah, and we will close with a prayer with the Oseh Shalom. Oseh Shalom.